How exactly do we love through service? Dominican Volunteers is an opportunity for service, community, study, and spirituality for anyone 21 years and older. Every August, DVs are placed in a community with other volunteers and Dominican sisters for an 11-month commitment to serve in ministry and live in a Dominican community. The programs cover basic expenses, which allows a volunteer to be in a full-time ministry for 40 hours per week. Ministries include social services, education, organic farming, community organizing, systemic change, social justice, campus ministry, and more. For many, the DV USA experience is the beginning of a lifelong commitment to work for justice and peace. Some volunteers continue as staff at their placements or other similar nonprofits. Others go on to graduate school to pursue careers of service. DVs gain valuable mission and life experience with a strong foundation for whatever they choose to do next. Is this opportunity to serve in your future? I sat down with Megan and Stephanie to answer all your questions on what it means to be a Dominican volunteer. For more information or to apply, you can visit their website, dvusa.org.
My name is Megan Roop. I am the Executive Director of Dominican Volunteers USA. My arrival to the program actually started back in 2012, and I was looking for an opportunity to discern my vocation. And I had a good mentor that recommended that, I see what life in community was really like. So I moved to Chicago as a volunteer in 2012, where I lived with 6 Springfield Dominicans on the north side of Chicago. And then for my ministry, I worked at Heartland Alliance's Refugee and Immigrant Community Service Program, teaching ESL, pre-GED, those sorts of things. Had an incredible experience, really enjoyed community life, but ultimately found that wasn't my vocation in that sense, but really fell in love with the work. So I continued to work with immigrant youth for the next 4 or 5 years, and then eventually took a step back, was working with another volunteer program, and then found my way back to Dominican Volunteers in 2017. And yeah, so I've been on staff ever since. It's been a really incredible journey and opportunity for me. I really love continuing to work alongside the Dominican sisters.
So my name is Stephanie Zavala. I am the program director for Dominican Volunteers, and I am fresh on staff. I guess I'd say I've only been here for about a year, but I was also a Dominican volunteer the year that Megan started on staff. So back in 2017, I had already been working for a couple of years, and I had graduated from a Dominican University. And so I just was really missing this community piece, this relationship piece that I felt that Dominicans foster really well. And I really wanted to be in an intentional community surrounded by sisters, surrounded by other folks who sort of share the same mission. So I decided to apply to DVUSA that year. And I was accepted and was working in the Bronx. So living and working in the Bronx, I was working at Sienna House. And that was a shelter for women who were experiencing homelessness. They were either pregnant or had a child under the age of 3. That was really incredible, really blessed experience working with the women there. And I was also living in the Bronx with Black Belt sisters at the time. And yeah, it was just like Megan, it was a really fruitful experience in that I really learned a lot about what it meant to be in relationship with folks, not just in relationship and community, but also in relationship with the folks that we do work with. And yeah, I still to this day have really great relationships with the women that I met that year. And it's really changed the ways in which I think about relationships. I think about community and service and all of that. So and then I came on board. And so I've been with DVUSA since.
Dominican Volunteers is an 11-month program. We start with an orientation in August, and then we end about mid-July usually. And that, of course, fluctuates from year to year. But that's approximately the timeline that we're looking at. We provide housing, transportation, room and board, health insurance, access to mental health care, spiritual direction, with the Dominican sisters, and would work full-time in a ministry, so 40 hours a week. We try to keep it at 40 hours a week because we do really feel very committed. We ask our volunteers to feel very committed to community life, so not to be working beyond that's to have good balance. We structure the program off the 4 pillars of Dominican life of ministry, study, prayer, and community.
Our Dominican volunteers are engaged in like the whole wide gamut, I suppose, of ministry, social services. So our volunteers they're either educators, they are working with domestic violence survivors, they are working with folks who are experiencing homelessness. Some of them are working on farms. And so sort of just a wide range of liberation work that we're engaged in. And so our program is really dedicated to the liberation of the Black and Brown communities that we work with. And so throughout the program, we really try to engage our volunteers in how it is that we have privilege, how it is that our privilege shows up during our ministry, during our community, how it is that we are going to be able to engage in liberation work and action and conversation in relationship building. So we, like Megan said, our volunteers are working 40 hours full-time in their ministry sites, and then they are also then engaging in community life. So that also includes prayer, that includes weekly community meals, a lot of also study. So this year we are also implementing some study materials like a call to allyship to really talk about the ways in which DVs engage in allyship work and liberation work. And so, we really are very intentional about the ways in which we foster relationships, in which we engage in conversation around all of these social justice issues and liberation issues. And I think, again, to drive that point, I think what makes us really different and unique is that we really look to our sisters for guidance, and we also look to them for spiritual direction and insight on prayer. And they've just got such rich lives. And so our volunteers really, we encourage them to engage deeply and fully into relationships with our sisters, because we really look to them for the guidance. So and our volunteers really enjoy actually living with the sisters. It's really great to get to know them in a different capacity, as opposed to just teachers or sisters that you see around campus. It's really life-giving to be able to get to know them.
Yeah, I mean, I know we work with the sisters here, and I mean, they're an amazing breed, and it's like to be able to know their stories and take on their legacy is kind of such a privilege to have.
Mm-hmm.
And I also love the fact that you guys mentioned that they only work 40 hours a week, because building community is just as important as the job that they do. Because I mean, I know when I first started working after college, like I had to do everything for my job, because you're new on the scene and you're new in the company, and you just like, that is such a priority for so many people that we kind of forget about. There's these other parts to us that we also need to grow in order to be the best person that we can be in our jobs. And so, burnout is like such a real thing when you first enter the workforce. Having that balance is such a good thing to learn, I think, when you first enter. So some questions for you. Are you guys done with all of the
we're good.
Okay, so some questions I thought of as you were speaking. What if a student isn't Catholic? Can they still sign up for this program? And what does that look like? Do you have to go to Mass? Do you have to do, Catholic things if you're not Catholic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so anybody is welcome to our program. We are a Catholic organization, but our volunteers do not need to be Catholic in order to apply to the program, to be accepted into the program. We really welcome folks of all backgrounds anyway, and we really strive for that. So we do ask our volunteers, as part of our community guidelines, that they engage in prayer at least 3 times a week. But that really does not have to be a formal Catholic prayer, the ways in which people think of prayer, right? It can be a poem, it can be a song, it can be a writing that they wrote that they just feel really called to share with folks. And so it's never going to be a straight cut, like you have to follow this sort of Catholic teaching, because we understand that, people have very different perspectives and interpretations of what it means to pray and what it means to be spiritual. And so we really welcome folks of all backgrounds. So
in regards to Mass, the only thing that I would add to that is volunteers are not required to go to Mass. One thing we do encourage our volunteers is to show up to things that matter to their community members. So just because maybe it's not life-giving for you, for example, there's a sister in Chicago who has an incredible relationship with her parish community. And just like who she is in that parish, I think is really inspiring and really speaks to the dedication and commitment she has made to her physical community. So we encourage our volunteers to just, a few times through the year, go to Mass with her just to see what that's like, because this is a really important space for her and she really loves to share it. So we do ask the volunteers to push themselves a little bit outside of their comfort zone to engage with things. And that goes across the board. That's not just Mass. If someone really, really identifies with their Catholic faith and they live with someone who, is of a different faith or is of no faith, sort of engaging in that with them as well, that it's this mutual relationship that we're all invested in each other because this matters to you. So therefore it's got to matter to me to some degree.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I know when I always went to Catholic school growing up, and then when I came to Malloy and I was invited to go to the preaching conference, which I'm sure you guys
Yes.
have been to or know of, and when I learned that, I mean, it sounds like now that I'm in this space, it makes sense, but like to learn that there were different ways to pray and that prayer wasn't just actually praying like the Our Father, that like, we prayed through music and the arts and dance and even just talking to somebody, like it completely changed my entire view. The Dominicans are just like, they are exactly what the church should be. They are so inviting. You could literally be anybody from anywhere and you are just as loved as the next person. And so it's really beautiful to see. So I love that. What cities do you typically, are there specific areas of the country that students typically go, or do they get a choice in where they get to go and work?
Our primary cities that we're active in, I would say, are New York City, Chicago, and then sort of the Bay Area, San Francisco, Redwood City.
Just developed new sites actually in Detroit with the Dominican Literacy Centers, and our volunteers there help English learners who need some extra literacy support. And then we also placed a volunteer at the Eco Justice Farm in Racine, Wisconsin, which has alpacas and has goats and has sort of everything. And so those are two of our newer ones, as well as the Kobe House, which is a jail ministry part of the Archdiocese of Chicago, essentially. And so we also developed that here in Chicago.
I was going to add Houston. We just developed a new site in Houston. So really, we are able to be wherever there are Dominicans, just as long as we have a place to lay our heads is really kind of what we're looking for. As long as there's a community active, we partner with our sisters a lot to say, what are the great organizations or schools that are in your area that could be a really good partner for us. Yeah. So we try to keep fresh new ministry sites coming every year, and we do that also based off the interest that we're receiving. So lately we've received a lot of interest around sustainability, eco-justice, sustainable farming practices. So we've been spending a lot of time trying to develop more sites so that people have more options for that. Yeah. And the volunteer has complete agency in that process. So they would rank their choices. Obviously, it's sort of a first come, first served basis. So if a ministry site is already filled by another person, unless they're willing to take a second volunteer, that would be unavailable. But we really don't proceed if the volunteer feels uncomfortable about the ministry site or the community or the geographical location in terms of that's too far from home or that's not far enough from home. So we really try to be as collaborative in that process, just based off what's available.
Yeah. And then just to reiterate, like Megan said, sometimes it looks like some ministry sites just aren't working, and some of our volunteers have ideas for other things. And so Megan and I sort of quickly act to try to find, because we have so many connections around the country with Dominicans, we try to act really fast to try to find a new ministry site that might be helpful. Not helpful, that might be of interest to the volunteers. So we really do try to take, we take their interest into consideration. And like Megan said, they have full agency around that.
So is there specific majors that are I guess, more ideal for this program? Or is it like any major, any background, any type of skill set is useful in some ministry that we have?
Take folks of all backgrounds, of all majors. For the most part, a lot of folks who come to us already have a social justice background, or they have some social work in their mind, things like that. But what we find, actually, what's really life-giving sometimes too, is that folks come in maybe with a graphic design major, which is perfectly fine, because sometimes we even need help with our graphic design. So come on board, bring us your skills. But then they decide, they're so changed and so transformed by the ministry that they decide they want to do social work, or they want to go into teaching. And so I think that's the beautiful thing about DVUSA, that you come in with one lens, and then you are sort of, your heart's opened up to so many different things and so many different ideas and social justice issues, that you really, our volunteers really start thinking about dedicating their lives to that. So yeah, anybody is welcome with any major.
And then do they have to be a current student right now? Is this also open to like alumni, grads, like people who are in grad school that might be graduating from grad school? Is there like an age limit to this?
This is something that we're actually adjusting for this year. We used to require folks have a bachelor's degree to join our program. And we realized that we have a lot of ministry partners that maybe they wouldn't require that educational experience. So we asked that an applicant be 21. Other than that, we will try to fit them, to a placement that's best suited for their qualifications. And then, like Steph was saying, we accept folks, anyone who's willing to do the work beyond the age of 21. And I think, a lot of programs have an age limit, and I understand why, because they live in community together, and you don't want to be the token older person, which I totally understand. And the nice thing about our program is that the sisters are always going to be the oldest folks in our communities. And so we really feel deeply committed to that idea of intergenerational, intervocational living. And so this year we have 2 women in retirement working as volunteers. And so I think it really adds to a really cool flavor for the cohort, because these folks have lived a lot of life and can provide a really good perspective when we're on retreat together. Especially when intergenerational problems come up in community, it's those volunteers that can really speak to, I can actually understand where Sister Pat might be coming from, because I feel similarly about that, or oh my gosh, Sister Pat really is being very rigid about this, So I think it's a really nice component of our program that we welcome folks, everyone beyond the age of 21.
And then I know we've mentioned living in community and, that they live with the sisters or a community that's already established, but what does that essentially mean? Like, are they the only volunteer? Is there always another volunteer living with them? Are they just in like a house of sisters?
So it depends. It really, there is no one clear answer, because it depends on the year. It depends on the cohort. It depends on the number of applicants. We really strive to at least put 2 volunteers in a community of sisters, so that they aren't the only, younger folks, if they are the youngest folks. So we really do try to accommodate that, just because we know companionship is important, and all of that. But it depends on how many applicants, again. So if we only have 5 applicants and they're sort of interested in all over the country, it's it's hard to put them together. So it depends. And also sometimes in the areas there are other volunteer programs that have folks, or mostly younger folks in the area, and so it's nice for them to connect with other people. So there's chances like that if they are the only one in community. But yeah, we strive to put at least 2 volunteers together, but that's not always going to be the case.
We try to be really transparent about that through the process, because if that's something that's really important to an applicant, then we want to prioritize that. So it really comes back to the agency of the applicant. Like, is this ministry like your end all be all? Because if that's the case, you have to know you might be by yourself. And in a lot of cases, they're like, that's fine. Well, I'm here for it. So we just got back from a site visit actually yesterday, and she is such a high introvert that spending time with the sisters is what she has time for. And so like, and what she has energy for. And so like for her, it works out really well that she's by herself, because I think she would feel pretty annoyed if there was like another peer in community drawing on some of that energy and getting her out of the house more. I think she'd struggle a little bit with that.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the person. I was by myself with 6 sisters. And it was a really fun opportunity. I mean, I'm the youngest child, so I was like the center of attention all the time. It was wonderful for me. Whereas Steph had peers in her community, and that was huge for her too. So
yeah. Yeah, and something to add to that too, if that's the case, I think something we always remind volunteers is that as much as we look to the sisters for guidance, they also have things to learn too, right? They are able to learn from the volunteers as well. And so we try to remind them to maybe be open to that, so that they know that they also have agency, and they can hold their community, their peers, because ultimately the sisters will be their community housemates, right? And so how do you hold each other accountable? And I think that's perfectly okay for younger folks to do that with sisters. I think it's always about the mutuality of the relationship that we really encourage.
Even though they're living in community with the sisters, they still are very much like, it's like you said, like having a housemate. Like they are by no means like, let's say, controlled by the sisters. Like I'm thinking like, people think after graduation of like moving out on their own, and like now you're going to move into a house with people even older than your parents, like going to feel more strict. But like the idea that you're living in community, it doesn't mean that like you're controlled by the members of the community.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And I'll speak to just my own experience of that. I lived with 3 sisters. And I think folks think of, I think you're right. I think it's a great point. People tend to think of sisters very rigid, like, very controlled. You have certain like hours that you need to be back. And at least for me, that wasn't the case. Our sisters were super understanding that we also like had a life. It was a new city that we wanted to explore, and they wanted us to do that. And so all that, like, at least in my house, what we had to do is write down when we would leave and when we came back, but there was never a check-in time or anything like that, because the sisters really understood that, aside from the ministry work that we were doing, we were a new city and wanted to meet new people and have new experiences. And they were very, very open to us coming and going, as long as we marked or indicated when we were back, just so that they knew that we were safe. But otherwise they were very chill and very encouraging of us going out into the city.
I think the sisters provide good structure. They provide good structure and rhythm to community life, because they've been doing it for decades. And so, and 23-year-olds never think they need a chore chart. They think like, it'll just get cleaned, and that doesn't happen. And, so it's like, it's those like household rhythms that the sisters have down really well. And they, they say, this is, they oftentimes tell the volunteers, this is how we've done this, do you have buy-in? Do you agree to this? Great. And then I know, like, speaking from my own experience, the sisters I lived with prayed from the Dominican praise, the liturgy of the hours that the Dominicans have, which was good, but it wasn't exactly very filling for me. I pray through music most often, and so I sort of put that to my community, like, when I lead prayer, is it okay if I bring other things into this space? And they were like, absolutely. Whoever's in charge of prayer for the week should absolutely do what feels good and right for them. So I think there are good ways that they provide structure, and then I think they're open in ways that really are the important things.
Yeah.
I think, we're, especially to hear, like, there are other volunteer programs that just the volunteers live in community. And so it is kind of unique that we are living in community very intentionally with sisters in the same Dominican family that we are. And so the idea that, like, just because they are older or maybe like actually vowed religious life does not mean that like your life and what you want to do as an adult is really gonna like change. Like, you can have your experiences of wanting to go out and explore a new city and make new friends, and also have this like, we're still focused on community and spiritual living, and all of that can kind of jive together, I think, is a good point for students and applicants to know.
Well, I think the wonderful thing about the Dominican family is like, this is really what St. Dominic imagined. St. Dominic had this vision of intervocational living. And I think that bodes really well for our program, is that our sisters have that model to sort of look to say, your vocation is good and wonderful, and my vocation is good and wonderful. And how can we, coexist in this space that is symbiotic, that we're both learning and growing together. So I think that's a pretty cool tradition within the family.
For like logistics of application, maybe just so that folks know what that looks like. If they head to our website, dvusa.org/apply, all the instructions are there. And so essentially what that looks like, it's you send in your initial application to become a Dominican volunteer. Once we have that, we can reach out to, additionally, you also need 3 references. So once we have the application and then your 3 references, we reach out to be able to schedule a Zoom interview, which we've always done, actually. We've known Zoom for a while now. So we do a video interview, and then if all seems well and we, the interest is mutual, then folks are accepted into the program. And then after that, they can begin the matching process with the ministry. And so depending on what they indicated their interests were on the application, we begin to sort of match them up so they can get interviewed by the ministry site. And then if all of that is good and it's a yes, then they get in like sort of an informal interview with the community, just to make sure that, they vibe well, or, that they're still, sisters are interested in this person joining their community. And then we go from there.
To sort of reiterate, at any point, if the applicant feels like maybe this isn't a great fit, then, we are committed to the applicant. Once they've been accepted to the program, we will continue to go back to the drawing board and try to find a good fit for them, until we've exhausted all options, pretty much.
Is there a specific time of the year that they have to apply by? Is there a deadline? Is there also a start date? Like, are they able to apply for next year now, or does that start later?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so the priority application deadline is March 1st. So they can begin applying now. It's on a rolling basis, so folks can apply now and we can get the ball rolling for next year, which would begin in August of 2021. So priority deadline is March 1st, but then applications are accepted until May 31st. For a beginning date of August 2021.
So if you're applied, accepted, you're planning to go, before you actually start your ministry, you guys have like an orientation, like a retreat or something, where you bring all the volunteers together and then they kind of like disperse and then they come back together again, right?
Yeah, and so that's essentially what was happening before the pandemic. That looks a little different now, and we don't know what 2021 will look like, but that's usually the case. We do have opening retreat orientation, which is about 6 or so days for folks to get acquainted with each other, get to know the program. So that's the first time folks meet together, and then they disperse, like you said. And then we also have a mid-year retreat and then a closing retreat. And those are sort of the 3 big opportunities for volunteers to come together. Again, with COVID, I'm not sure what that will look like, the following year. Maybe it'll be a gathering over Zoom. But we still gather together to get folks acquainted with the program.
Perfect. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's also great to know that even if the only volunteer in a community, they're still interacting with the other volunteers and still building relationships with other volunteers. They just might not be like their housemate.
Yeah.
So it's still awesome to know.
Yeah. And that's like Steph was talking about this earlier. We have a year-long study opportunity where we're all going to gather monthly on Zoom. So those are just more opportunities for the cohort to get to know each other and sort of build some of those relationships. So they can do that if they find they really jive with somebody else, they can sort of forge that on their own